Fallout Equestria the Chrysalis, Chapter 23, Rage and Retribution. I took things about as well as could be expected. I sat back, staring down at her in silence, my hooves moving to my muzzle. Even with the seeds of suspicion planted with Emerald's final pleas, I wasn't entirely prepared for what I saw. While Dusty and Starlight gaped and murmured, I simply stared and tried to piece everything together to make sense of it all. That lasted about 5 seconds before I broke down crying. Emerald was dead, one of the kindest mares I'd met, and she died in pain and terror, choking on her own blood. The first changeling I had discovered since losing my own hive, the one who professed the same kind of outlook as my own sisters had. One who could have even been a descendant of my own hive. One who had died in my own hooves, and me, unable to prevent it. A changeling who, if her story were true, had been isolated from her own kind as I was. The two of us, so close to discovering that we were not alone. I sank down, escaping Starlight's comforting hooves to grasp Emerald's body, clutching her tightly as I sobbed into her still chest. An irritational part of me wanted to shake her, to beg her to wake up, as if my pleading might do what first aid and magical bandages could not. I even stripped away my own disguise at some point, as if to show her belatedly that she wasn't alone. Eventually, my cries faded, while Starlight gently rubbed a hoof along my back. As the sudden wave of emotion started to break and recede, my mind started to engage. My first thoughts turned to shame and recrimination. Not simply at breaking down over the death of another changeling, mind you, or even over the sense of failure at having been unable to protect her. No. I felt shame for how selfish my thoughts were. This was a mare who had given so much, given everything. And in the face of her example, I was crying over what her death cost me. I was crying over the lost opportunity to reconnect with my own kind. I was probably being a bit too harsh with myself, but I suppose it's understandable given the situation. In any case, sorrow and guilt weren't going to help us now. Slowly, my mind turned towards more productive thoughts. I sniffled, drawing in a deep breath as I pushed myself upright. Starlight pressed up against my side as I sat up, her forelegs wrapped around me, but I ignored her for a moment. My horn lit up, grasping Emerald's pip-buck and lifting it. I undid the strange latch on the back, which now made sense to me, and removed it. The medical screen flashed fresh errors, but I ignored them, pressing buttons as I sought one particular piece of information. After a few seconds, I froze, staring down at the screen. Starlight gave another gentle squeeze.
What is it?
I swallowed, and when I spoke, my voice came out thick and rough.
Serenity.
Starlight and Dusty scooted in, looking down at the map screen with me. The map marker seemed so insignificant amidst the hundreds of other marks. It wasn't labeled as a settlement or even a ruin. It was just a generic landmark tag which could so easily blend in with all the others.
That's where she came from,
I said.
Her family. Oh shit.
Starlight murmured, a hoof moving to her mouth.
You mean other changelings?
I nodded, but Dusty wasn't quite as sure. Or it could have just been ponies that she had worked for. Hell, maybe still did.
What?
Starlight said, straightening up.
No way she's still working for those slavers.
We don't know any of that, Dusty replied, shaking his head, and his eyes fell over Emerald's still form. Maybe that was just another lie. I don't know. Sorry. Not the time for it. I lowered the pip-buck, looking down at her as well. My throat constricted as tears started to well up once again.
No.
I croaked.
We know.
Dusty looked at me. I could see he wasn't convinced, but he didn't argue. He merely looked down upon her once more. We sat in silence for a minute before I finally stirred, reaching out with my hooves and my magic. Slowly and carefully, I disentangled her body from the barding and equipment, and after a few moments, Starlight and Dusty joined in to help me. Soon she was lying bare on the floor. I wish I could have seen her like that in life. She was a striking changeling in many ways, elegant and fit, and while her carapace was healthy and smooth, age had faded the glossy shell to a duller gray. It was the look of a changeling who had lived a long, happy life, full of love. Laid out on her other side to conceal the jagged hole and the majority of the blood, she looked almost peaceful. I stood over her for a long moment, taking in every detail. Then I lowered my head, touching my horn to hers, and called up my magic. Green fire flashed into being, rippling steadily across her form. I stepped back, as did the others, and watched as it rapidly consumed her. Seconds later, there was nothing left but a fine layer of ash. Starlight was the one to eventually break the silence.
What now?
Fall back, or push on, Dusty murmured, slowly shaking his head. Normally, I just make the call, but I'm not feeling so hot about my judgment lately.
Fuck, falling back.
Sickle growled.
I was already gonna murder the shit out of them for those pussy-ass mines. Now, I'm gonna get fucking nasty.
Starlight eyed her skeptically.
Why? Because of Emerald? You didn't even like her. Well, fuck no, I didn't like her.
She followed that with an armor-rattling shrug.
But you cunts did, and that's good enough for me.
I sniffed, wiping at my cheeks, and threw in my own 2 bits.
I'm with Sickle. We press on and kill them all. Fuck yeah.
Sickle rumbled. Dusty nodded, though he threw in a word of caution. Just keep in mind we're out of decent medical supplies. There's going to be no margin for error.
They'll have some.
Sickle said.
Just make sure to kill them all before they can use them. And after we've taken out the raiders,
I said.
I want to go check out Serenity.
Dusty's ears folded back, giving me a concerned look, but he didn't argue. Instead, he opted for a more neutral position. Let's just focus on dealing with these raiders first. He sat back, looking around, and slowly shook his head. Let's take a few minutes to get all of our gear sorted out and everything. Then, we'll set off. I stood without a word and walked off, the pip-buck floating beside me. I retrieved the magazines I had left on the ground, then reloaded them with the spare ammo I had carried, a process made much easier with magic. Soon that was done. Lacking anything else to do, I started to disassemble and clean my rifle, trying to remember exactly how Dusty had done it. The interior was surprisingly filthy, caked with carbon and dirt. I focused, meticulously scrubbing at every part. I was so focused that I was caught by surprise when Starlight touched my side. I froze, glancing her way to see her look of concern. I held her gaze for a couple of seconds before drawing in a slow, calming breath and forced myself to relax.
I'm trying not to make this all personal,
I said, my voice quiet as I turned back to my weapon.
but I don't think I'm doing a good job of it.
Dusty spoke up from across the room. Just keep your mind on the mission, that'll help. I looked over to see him slowly loading fresh rounds into his own magazines, while his eyes scanned out the windows. There'll be plenty of time to go over it all once you're not in the field.
That sounds familiar.
I murmured, focusing on the bolt and all of its little fiddly pieces as I scrubbed it clean.
The mission comes first.
I sighed, trying to suppress the bitter feelings that threatened to bubble up.
You've been here before, I take it?
I heard a sigh. Yep, I led a ranger squad for a few years and we got called in for all the worst shit. Got into combat probably 50 times, mostly against small raider bands, bandits, and the rare wanted criminal. Had more than a dozen casualties under my lead. 3 of them died every time we had to press on and finish the mission, and we had to focus, so more ponies wouldn't join them. He slid the last magazine into its pouch and closed the saddlebags. Just focus on the mission, we can deal with the rest afterward. I nodded.
Sounds a lot like being an infiltrator. Keep going, complete your mission, and don't let your own emotions get in the way of what you're doing.
Yeah, pretty much. He agreed. And you know, you seem to be pretty capable. Just stay focused, and I think you'll do fine.
Maybe.
I said, though without any enthusiasm.
It's been a rough month.
It's been an outright hellish month, Dusty corrected. And yeah, it's taken its toll, but you've kept going. You've done a lot better than most ponies would. I was tempted to argue, but I held back.
Thanks.
We settled into our work. Starlight spent some time working on the broadcaster before declaring it a totally lost cause, with its circuit board broken in half and at least 2 gems cracked. Afterwards, we searched the raiders for any supplies that we might have missed in our frantic scramble for potions. There wasn't much. The collection of weapons seemed almost pitiful when compared to our own. The pair in the saloon had one of those little short-barrel submachine guns with a drum that was larger than it was, and a smooth-barrel pipe rifle that still had a misfed rounds jammed sideways in its breech. The sniper pony's bolt-action rifle was the best of the lot, though it was badly worn, and its scope was freshly broken thanks to Dusty's grenade. We took the submachine gun and its ammo, just in case, and Dusty searched the sniper for what little rifle ammo he had. We claimed their food and water as well, while Sickle cut away the right ear of each raider, or in the case of the submachine gun mare, tore it away from the mess of flesh and bone that had once been her head. She spent the rest of her time hacking apart the raider inside the saloon. Starlight grimaced and walked out, looking somewhat ill. I merely felt a slight distant concern that I wasn't more bothered by Sickle's actions. With nothing left for us in that ghost of a town, it was time to move on. I had no more excuse to delay. I floated up Emerald's pip-buck, regarding it in silence. I felt so torn over it, so many warring emotions all demanding attention. Instead, I did as Dusty had said. I set them aside for the moment and pressed on. A quick flicker of green flame hid part of the armor over my left foreleg, and I floated the pip-buck into place. The latch closed and the screen flashed various notifications as it took in its new situation. My vision flashed and flickered as the eyes forward sparkle came online, overlaying information across my vision. Notifications scrolled rapidly by as the device calibrated. I turned my head, and the compass display at the bottom swung around. A single green blip marked Starlight's position. The notifications abruptly ended, and I looked back to the screen. The status display was content once again. The cute cartoon pony had been replaced by a similarly stylized changeling. I blinked. So many questions welled up, but I pushed them aside. There would be time for that later. Right now, I needed focus. I looked around again, familiarizing myself with the elements of the EFS display. It was fairly simple, and I was thankful to note unobtrusive, hovering over at the edges of my vision.
Pretty cool, huh?
Starlight asked, though she lacked any real enthusiasm. I appreciated the effort, though, and nodded in agreement. Get real familiar with that thing, Dusty said. Those pip-bucks are probably the most tactically useful piece of kit that we've got.
Yeah, they're pretty great,
Starlight said. A real smile started to creep out across her muzzle.
Did you see that grenade that I tagged in midair? Sats is awesome.
Dusty smirked. I meant the whole friend or foe system. Picking up threats in friendly locations through solid walls is a huge tactical advantage. I looked down at the screen again, and its strange, smiling changeling. Another bout of emotion welled up in protest of the thought that came next, but I focused on the practical.
Maybe you should have it then.
Dusty looked down at it as well, mulling over the idea. It was obvious that he saw merit in the idea, but he shook his head. No, you keep it. Figure you've got a better claim on it. So long as you're quick and clear on communicating anything your EFS picks up, that should be good enough. Besides, you'll probably get more out of Sats than I would.
Thanks.
Speaking of which, Dusty said, you might want to give it a try just to get used to it. Better to familiarize yourself with it now instead of in the middle of combat. A ruined building 30 yards away supplied me with targets. I loaded one of the submachine gun magazines into my pistol, using the Raider's ammo instead of my much more uncommon subsonic rounds. I started with a test round, taking my time and firing a couple of bullets at each of the 3 small sections of barely standing wall. It was an unfamiliar sensation, firing my pistol while holding it in my magic. For once, the sights were much further forward. There wasn't the same physical kick, merely the sudden movement as the pistol tried to twist out of my magic's grip. Still, it was reasonably easy, so long as I took my time. I lowered the pistol, scanning over my targets again. Then I triggered Sats and brought my weapon up. Most I could do at this rate is avenge your death by killing every single one of those bastards. And hopefully, maybe some of those survivors might still be standing, but who knows. Anyways, let's get on to our determined donators. Top donators are 630, Peter Coulthard, J Tinman, Darkside, and Only One Thing. Dash of Evergreen, Rayden, Narwhals, Blackmoonheart, Pastel Skies, Austin Rollins, Crazy Girl 557, Stu Heck, Swordbrother and Mordred, Omicron Lyrae, Will, Chris Twinkie, Hadzaza, Ride Soul, and many more fantastic people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.